On today's episode of the That You May Know Him podcast, I am talking to my good friend, Danial Field, who was saved miraculously last year out of a pretty dark and deadly lifestyle. I really think that his story is going to inspire you, and I believe that his testimony has a very important message in it for Christians everywhere. You're listening to the That You May Know Him podcast, illuminating biblical truth and applying it to faith, life, and culture. I am your host, Blake Barbera, and I'm happy to be joined by my friend and brother, Danial Field. Dan, what's going on, brother? Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you, Blake?
Good, man. I'm really thankful that you took the time to do this. Dan's just going to share his testimony this episode. That's all this is hearing his salvation story and how amazingly God worked in his life. Brother, as we get into this, would you mind just telling listeners a little bit about your background, who you are, what you do, if you're comfortable, what part of the country you're in, and just stuff like that. Just introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come onto the podcast. I was born and raised in West Virginia. I worked as a paramedic, firefighter, and police officer for about 13 years. It was a great career helping people, but eventually I got really burned out with that, and my wife and I decided to purchase our own business. We own a pizza shop, and we've been doing that for the past few years. While I'm now going to seminary. In younger life, I grew up in a very poor home. My mother and father cussed each other quite a bit. There was a lot of verbal arguments. Every family has their own curses or traumas, things of that nature. That was mine. Of course, that rubs off on you. So later in life, when my wife and I got married, the way that I would argue was to scream. I would go immediately to anger. That was my go-to for everything. Unfortunately, hers was the opposite. It was to bottle things up. So it was a perfect combination for things to eventually go wrong.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That is, I think, a match that you find surprisingly often in life. They say opposites attract. Yeah. I know, my own personal background is I'm also from a family where raising your voice was not uncommon. It's kind of common in my genetic background. I'm Italian American descent mostly. And it's funny, people used to look at me and my dad having a normal conversation and think we were arguing, but it wasn't. And my wife is much more on the quieter side, so it's something you definitely have to beware of when you're dealing with someone who's not cut from that vein. But so did you grow up in a Christian home?
Kind of. There was that slight Christian influence. When I was very young, I would say the good night prayer. And then around 8 or 9, I think, my parents decided that we were all going to go to church as a family. We went for a couple years. I learned a little bit about the Bible, read through some various stories through a child's lens, nothing very serious. And then my parents got a divorce, and that was the end of church. Neither parent progressed that any. So from that point through adolescence, I believed that I knew enough about the Bible to determine that it was just children's stories. It was an old book. And I was very much an atheist for many years until I would say my mid to late 20s. I started to shift towards an agnostic mindset that maybe there was this all-powerful being that created the universe, but he doesn't have a hand in anything. Very indirect.
Sounds sort of like a deist, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, sort of like a lot of the founding fathers were that way. They believed that God was real, there was a creator, but he was very much removed and had nothing to do with the events of humanity. He was removed from the world and from this part of creation. So you didn't grow up in I wouldn't call it a Christian home, it doesn't sound like, but you didn't grow up in an anti-Christian home either. You sort of navigated your own path in terms of all that. Went from atheism to agnostic. And what was your impression like of Christians as you sort of grew up into manhood and were out on your own?
Yeah, as it evolved, I started to look at Christians as someone who needed something to explain the difficulties of life. You know, they needed that crutch. They couldn't deal with life on their own, so they needed some comfort that wasn't based in reality. And of course, the other side of the coin that unfortunately you hear often, I too believed, is that religion is a form of control for the people. Of course, you can look through history and make that argument in certain pieces of time, but as a whole, that's not accurate. And you know, towards the agnostic mindset, I started to adopt this idea that I had a fascination with the Norse gods, and I got several tattoos on my body of them. I would do these little prayers to them. Yeah, it's just a weird confusion state, I think, for many years, trying to find God.
Okay, gotcha. This is mostly, would you say this is throughout most of your 20s at this point?
Yeah, I'd say that's mid to late 20s in that area.
Yeah. So were you into shows like Vikings back then?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. So sorry, this is a totally random question, but do you think now that you've been saved and you're a seminarian, what do you think about when you hear Christians watching shows like that? Is it, I know there's a spectrum here, but like, does it bother you, or are you of the mindset, since you were involved in that world, that it's something that Christians should avoid?
No, it's fine. I think Christians should branch out to different mindsets. I think that one's pretty mild. It's very much connected to Christianity. And if you look at the whole story, Christianity prevails ultimately. But I think it's very healthy to compare Christianity to other religions. What was it, the Bhagavad Gita? You would know better than I. Just to read those and see how Scripture holds up, because you'll find that it holds up much better.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. So branching out and learning about other religions and understanding is actually part of our job, right? As those who are able to give an answer or an apology to those who ask why we have such hope in us. That's cool. Yeah, I always wondered, because funny story, I used to watch shows like that. I don't really anymore, just because I don't have time. But when I was on winter break, when I was in seminary years ago, I spent it watching like 3 seasons of Vikings, because it was a great show. And I always wondered, did Ragnar become a Christian at the end of the show? I don't know. So, some say he did, some say he didn't, but we can move on from that. So you're kind of meandering through life throughout your 20s, and you're not a believer, and you're searching. It sounds like, if you're getting into Norse mythology. Where were you at the beginning of last year or end of 2023? Where were you at in life leading up to getting a revelation from Christ and becoming a Christian? What was life like for you?
I would say, just to end off the last subject, when I was a paramedic, I would say in the mid 2000s, around 2012, 13, somewhere in there, I had this patient, and this is my mindset on what I thought about God at the time. And this patient was writhing in pain. It's the middle of the night. It's 2 a.m. I'm tired. I don't want to be there. I'm working 20-hour shift. And she keeps saying, God, please take the pain away. And in my head, I'm mocking her, saying, why would God help you? There's people starving on the other side of the planet. Why on earth would he come to you right now?
Yeah.
And I'm laughing at her in my head. Of course, outside I'm professional. I'm, displaying a face of compassion, but I'm mocking her. And
Yeah.
the funny thing is, ultimately, I gave into that, and I gave her pain management, even though I knew that I didn't want to,
Yeah.
based on her vitals and whatnot. It didn't look like she needed it, but her prayers were answered through me, and I didn't even realize it. But that's who I was. That's how I looked at God. I very much mocked the concept. But yeah, the beginning of last year was interesting to say the least. My wife and I had been growing apart since 2020 when our son was born. He became the focus of our attention, which I think is natural. But
Yeah.
we grew apart in various emotional ways. And then 2023, we kind of reconnected. We realized what was happening. We came together. We thought we were very strong. And through that, we decided to pursue a polyamorous lifestyle, which, for those of you who don't know, it's where we incorporated the relationship with other women into our lives. And that brought on other things. In one aspect, I felt on top of the world. I'm a man.
Yeah.
I have multiple women. This is fantastic. This is great. On the other hand, I experienced more depression, more anxiety, and far more pride than I had ever experienced. And that all consumed me. We had three women involved with us at the start of 2023, and one of them we became very close to, and she practiced in witchcraft. And with that, she convinced me to start taking 𝗪𝗏, which is a derivative of THC. It's supposed to calm your mind, ease anxiety, help you sleep. And it did none of that. It created more confusion. When I slept, the bed was completely tore up in the morning. I was tortured in my sleep. 𝗪𝗏 is not FDA approved. And since it's not, many manufacturers create it with neurotoxins, so it can induce psychosis depending on the brand. And with my history of anger problems, it greatly enhanced that.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a synthetic drug. Am I right in saying that?
It is, yes.
It's a synthetic drug. THC is like it's got the same thing as marijuana, but it sounds like stronger.
Well, so THC is natural. They pull it from the cannabis plant, but they use that to call it a THC product. It's largely synthetic. In some cases, they mix it with K2, which is a very synthetic drug. It absolutely induces psychosis. I've seen that many times as a paramedic, but I had no idea of any of the manufacturing process when I was taking it.
So you and your wife, you said at the beginning of 23, I think you started drifting apart, or was that a year earlier? Was that 22?
No, in 2020, we started to drift apart. 2023, we came together again emotionally.
And everything was going well. And so you decided, at least you thought it was going well, but you thought also, let's add some other people to this equation, which means it probably wasn't going that well, right? Maybe in your minds it was, but so between that and then you get introduced to this drug and you're involved with someone who's practicing witchcraft, it sounds like you guys were, whether you knew it or not, really searching for some type of fulfillment. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I think God was calling us for years, and we were just blind and deaf to it. My wife was I think for 2 years, 2022 to 2024, she had suggested multiple times that we go to church, and I would brush it off. So we were both being called. We just didn't realize it. We would ignore it.
Gotcha. So you weren't at the point, well, maybe you weren't at the point where you were totally opposed to church, but it was not something you were even going to entertain. Wow.
Correct.
I never caught that before. God was knocking on your door for a while leading up to the events that took place.
Yeah, I wouldn't listen. I listened through my other ear and gave into my fleshly desires.
Yeah.
Really all of them.
Yeah. It sounds like you were maybe that dabbling in Norse religion was rubbing off, because you sounds like you were living like an old Viking king, which is funny. It's glamorized on TV now, but you lived it, and it sounds like it was pretty destructive with having multiple women and the drugs. So you're in this lifestyle, and what happens in 2023? It sounds like things are going downhill. You can't sleep. Well, you sleep, but you have terror at night and your bed's tore up in the morning.
Yeah. So at the end of 2023, I would have arguments with my wife while I was asleep. I would sleep talk and sleepwalk. I would scream unintelligible things rather. She said that my eyes would be bloodshot. Just really crazy stuff. And then in January or February of 2024, all of that kind of built to a climax where we were having an argument in our home, and I picked up a dining room chair and completely destroyed it in the floor in front of her, just crushed it in pieces, screaming at her. I don't remember much of the incident because I was on Delta 8, but I'm sure that was absolutely terrifying. And shortly after, I had come home from work, and my wife, our son, and our dogs were gone.
Wow. So the drug is definitely making the anger problems worse. And for those who are listening and not watching, I mean, people who are watching can probably tell, but just in case they can't, or if someone's listening, Dan, you're also a bodybuilder, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But you're not a small individual. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
So you getting enraged and breaking stuff is probably a little more terrifying than if, a person of lesser stature would have done so, right?
That would be horrifying. And then to endure that on an almost daily basis. I don't blame her for leaving at all. And as the story progresses, I'm very glad that she did.
Gotcha. If you don't mind my asking, at this point, we'll get to that, because we're building up to the best part, but I just want people to have a full picture.
Sure.
Were you living with other people at the time with your wife? And also, how many drugs were you taking? Like, was it a daily thing? Was alcohol involved? Like, what's the full picture with that part of it? Yeah,
so we didn't have anyone living in. It's kind of in and out. We would visit the homes of these women. One was married, one didn't have a divorce finalized, another was not married. So there was a mix of adultery and fornication. But we didn't have anyone living in really because of our son. We didn't want to promote immoral behavior, ironically.
Yeah. I don't know if I froze or if Dan froze.
Yeah. What was the second part of the question?
Oh, there you are. You're back. I don't know if you froze or if I froze, but the second part of the question was, how much of this Delta 8 were you taking? And was there other substances? Was alcohol involved? Like how bad was this cocktail of substances?
Yeah, so I've never really been much of a drinker. even then, I think I would have one glass of whiskey or a couple beers throughout the year.
Okay.
It's never been a stronghold of mine. But the Delta 8 I was taking for anxiety and for sleep purposes. I think I was taking about 75 milligrams throughout the day, which is quite a bit, and then 100 to 150 milligrams at night to sleep. So I was constantly on it. There was no break from it. And again, it wasn't to get high or anything. It was really to straighten my mind out when I quit rubbing snuff, when I quit oral tobacco.
Okay.
And it's a terrible alternative.
Okay. Sounds like it. So this stuff is used as an upper and a downer. Is that right? You take it during the day and you take it to sleep at night?
Well, it's definitely more of a depressant, and it was just to calm my mind.
Okay.
My mind was used to a stimulant. It was used to nicotine. And
Okay.
without that, it was just my mind's racing all the time. So I wanted to ease that. And at the time, I thought that was the best way.
Okay. Gotcha. Wow. All right. So this whole situation's going on. You're doing the polyamorous lifestyle. You've got drugs involved now. And funny though, you said, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. God, though, now that you look back, was definitely knocking on your door. And you had a moral compass because you didn't want to expose your son to immoral behavior, whether you realized it or not.
Yeah.
And then you come home in early 2024, the day after going kind of on a rage bender, and your wife and child and dogs are all gone. So what happens next?
Yeah. So it really hit me hard when I walked through the door. There was a sudden realization that my life was over. My family was gone. Everything that I thought I was living for was gone. And my wife had left a note. I read that. And my next thought was, well, I can't recover from this. I've lost everything. So this is the end. And I was about to end my life. And as I was about to, I saw a picture of my son in my head, and that's all I could see. So I held off, and I drank a fifth of Jameson, and took just a handful of Delta 8. It was a lot, and just kind of drowned in my misery. And I really look at that point and see the death of the old me. I think that's when it occurred. And then the next day, I was just kind of wandering, like a soulless husk. And I felt this very, very strong pull. It was a need to talk to this guy that I knew. I really didn't like him at the time. I thought he was annoying. I told my wife a week before that I was going to quit talking to him. So this isn't a close friend. It's not someone who I know is religious or anything. I had no idea that he was a godly person. I didn't even know why I needed to talk to him, but I had this strong need. And
where did you know this guy from?
Yeah, I knew him from the gym. He's another big guy, bald head. But
is that a theme with you big guys? A lot of you have bald heads?
Yeah, unfortunately.
I was kidding, but you confirmed it. So you wake up from this bender and you feel empty. I mean, you thought about killing yourself the night before, and there's just this strong pull to talk to this random guy who at the time you didn't even really like that much and you didn't know was a Christian.
Yeah, I had talked to a few friends in the morning. No one was really, I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew there was something and I wasn't getting it. And somehow I knew that this guy had the answer. Yeah. That's the best way I can explain it. And I didn't even have his phone number. I had to look him up on Facebook and send him a message and hope that he saw it. And luckily he did. And he allowed me to go to his house, and he talked to me for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
But during that talk,
Wow.
I cried a lot. He cried a lot. We just went through everything that had happened, and he shifts the conversation to Jesus, and I can't recall the whole conversation, but it's very Jesus and God minded.
Yeah.
He was just preaching the gospel to me, and it opened me up. And
Yeah.
I'm bawling my eyes out, and he says, "Do you know where you're going to go when you die?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Do you want to?" And I said, "Yeah." And he asked if I wanted to give my life to Jesus, and with every bit of my soul, I said, "Yeah." And we recited this prayer. There's a lot of pastors that promote the sinner's prayer and these various things, and they're great, but they mean nothing if there's not a heart behind it.
Yeah.
And I don't recall the words at all, but my
Wow.
heart was there 100%. And I repeated the words, and I verbally cried out to God. I said, "I don't want to be this person anymore." With everything I had, just tears streaming down my face. And in that moment, I mean, split second, my anger was completely gone. Like the entire emotion was ripped out.
I'm sorry. What was
I,
completely
I,
gone? You cut out for a sec.
the anger, the complete
Anger.
emotion of anger was ripped out of me, which is miraculous in itself. But I felt this feeling of comfort and
Yeah.
just wholeness in the center of my chest. Knew instantly that that's what I had been seeking my whole life, and I'd finally found it. And I feel as though there was a demonic presence over me for years, and it really calls to mind the story of Legion in Mark 5, where Jesus meets the man that's possessed, and the man's just tortured and tortured and tortured, and Jesus sets him free. And the man wants to go with Jesus, and Jesus says, "No, you go tell your friends about me." And I really feel that was, in that moment, he was telling me to go tell everyone what had happened to me.
Yeah. Wow.
And that feeling of peace, I found is best described in John 14:27, where Jesus says, "I'm leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart, and the peace I give you is a gift the world cannot give."
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, man. That's incredible. So you experienced, I should say, the Lord's peace in that moment. And you went basically in a moment from being a person who thought Christianity was kind of a joke for weak people to accepting Christ as your Lord. I got to ask, in that moment, did you know who Jesus was? Or was this
That
like a
is
step of faith? Yeah.
that is the only thing that I knew about Christianity for certain. Everything else, all the stories of the Bible, that was something to get to later. Maybe they're true, maybe they're not. Is what I felt in the moment. The only thing
Yeah.
I know for sure is that Jesus was fully God, fully man. He, he saved me, and that it felt like God came down from the heavens and physically touched me.
Wow. Wow. You know what this reminds me of, brother? It
What's that?
reminds me of, now don't get too flattered here, bro. It reminds me of the story of Paul, the apostle, or Saul, because he writes about it later on in Galatians about when he got saved. He was against Christ. He was opposing the people of God and opposing God in every way. And the way he describes his salvation experience is that when Jesus Christ gave me a revelation, he was given a revelation of Christ, which explains how in a moment someone can go from from being antichrist, from opposing God and his people, to being completely certain with all of their heart that Jesus Christ is God and is the Son of God and is Lord.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only thing that I can compare it to. And I mean, I think there's further testament to this revelation in Matthew 16, when Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they say, some say Paul, some say Elijah, but who do you say that I am? And Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." You know, people have debated that passage for years. The Catholics say that Jesus is saying, "On this rock, you, Peter, on this rock, I will build my church." I believe what Jesus is saying in response to Peter's revelation of Christ is that on this, I will build my church, on the fact that God has revealed to you, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but your Father in heaven, who I am. And it's one of my favorite questions to ask people. Like, did Christ reveal himself to you? And you know what? For many Christians, they don't have that experience the way you did, but you had it. I mean, he revealed himself to you in a moment and brought you from darkness to light. That is incredible.
Well, and I do agree with your interpretation of that. I think if you look at it closely, that is accurate. And I can trace my salvation to a specific point in time, March 9th, 2024. But I would encourage Christians to not dwell on that at all. Many Christians have no idea when they were saved. They don't know the date, the hour. And that's really not important. The important thing is to keep faith in Christ. The moment doesn't matter. If you focus on a moment, you're going to experience doubt. The devil's going to cast doubt into your mind. And, oh, was I really saved? Was that really the moment? So if you haven't experienced that, don't worry about it. That's not important.
Yeah. Here. Yeah, I fully agree. It's a pretty amazing story, and I'm glad you got it. But I'm one of those people that I don't know when I was saved. I don't have a specific day. I know the first time I prayed in tongues as a young person, but that's pretty much it. I don't know the day or even the specific age I was. But to second your point, the New Testament talks a lot about not just having been saved, but being saved now, presently, and being saved one day in the future. And so I encourage people also to focus on the ways that you're being saved right now and sanctified. Because the salvation experience doesn't happen all in a moment. It happens throughout your life as you live for Christ and follow him. And one day we'll all be able to look back and say, yep, that was the day I was completely saved. The day I saw him face to face. But okay, so back to you. You're in this moment. You feel like anger has been taken away from you and it's been replaced with peace. And
just true wholeness. The Hebrew word is shalom, which to us, we're very familiar with that word. But if you examine the true definition of shalom, it's far more than the English definition of peace. It is that wholeness that only God can give. And to explain the anger, this wasn't like a normal anger. I like to visualize it as I had a rabid dog on a chain that I have control of it. It's right here, but every now and then it would get away from me. And, that was that anger exploding. It was this burning anger that I had all the time. It wasn't just something that would pop up. And in that moment, it was gone. It just completely gone. It's been almost a year now, and I haven't experienced anger at all. I was very terrified for 3 or 4 months that it was just going to come back. But, God heals the physical to show that he has power and dominion over the spiritual. And, it's really weird to not have an emotion, an entire emotion, but it's completely changed me.
Wow. That's awesome. So it's been almost a year and you haven't had an issue with anger since then.
No, I mean, I don't even have to work to control it. It's just not there.
What about like road rage, driving in the car? Someone cuts you off.
I used to I would want to run people off the road, but no, if someone's going slow, it's just an instant thought like, well, I guess I wasn't supposed to get there at whatever time.
That's awesome, man. Even when the West Virginia Mountaineers lose a tight game, nothing? I mean, nothing?
Unfortunately, that's more common than not.
Nice. That's amazing. How has how have you been pastored or counseled in that regard? Have people been encouraging you to just, continue to live that and confess that God took your anger from you, or have you been given any pushback?
Yeah, I wouldn't say any pushback. Everyone's pretty supportive, but I mean, if I were from the outside looking in, that's a pretty crazy thing to fully take in. If someone tells you they're missing an emotion, it's like, you just have really good control over it.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the most popular thought or takeaway. But I don't hold that against anybody. I think it's completely human. But it's here. Anyone who knew me before and looks at me now can see the change.
Yeah. Yeah. You exchange shalom, God's perfect integral wholeness, to use our friend Dr. Meyer's definition. You exchange anger with shalom, you're going to notice a difference big time.
Absolutely.
Big time.
Absolutely.
So then where does the story go from there? You got radically saved. It sounds like in a moment, or maybe at best over a couple hours as you were talking with your friend, and you're still separated from your wife and your child at this point.
Yeah. So my wife and child were gone on a Friday. This was the next day. It was a Saturday. My friend my now friend and brother invited me to church the next day, and I agreed, considering what had just happened to me.
Yeah.
That evening, night rather, I had a revelation. I was fully conscious. I wasn't asleep. I had a revelation. It could best be described as I'm in like an IMAX movie theater or something, and just every single moment of my life where I've wronged my wife, every disagreement, every time I put her down, dismissed her, screamed at her, just every single moment played through.
Yeah.
And it was God showing me like, hey, this is who you were.
Yeah.
You can't continue like this. And that was really eye-opening. And the next day, I go to church, and the pastor is preaching on marriage. And he's going through all of the scripture that lines up with, this is how to have a biblical marriage. And it was everything that I was not doing.
Yeah.
The pastor hadn't preached on marriage for 3 or 4 years, he said.
Wow.
So that in itself, I think, was miraculous.
You had that revelation of the man you were and how you had wronged your wife on the night you got saved, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Wow.
And then Sunday night, I had a vision or a dream where I was in this pool of water. I was walking out of it, and the vision starts midway walking out. My skin was pure white, not just like Caucasian. It was pure white.
Yeah.
I'm walking out, and I look behind me, and there's just tar coming, like draining down my legs into this water, and the water is now unclean, but I'm completely white. And for about 2 weeks after that, I physically felt as though there was water in my sinuses.
Wow.
Anyone who's ever gone swimming or something, it was really weird. And then following church services, we talked about living water and whatnot. And I'm learning more about Jesus. And it felt as though that was Jesus baptizing me.
Yeah.
And I just think that's incredible.
So you had a dream, is that right? On the Sunday after you got saved?
Yeah.
Was it? So it wasn't like a vision, it was a dream.
Yeah.
That you are coming out of the water white, completely pure white, and there's tar in the water. Like you just got plunged basically
Yeah.
into cleanness, and then you felt like you had water in your sinuses for a couple of weeks. It sounds like he did baptize you, bro. I'm not gonna lie. That's what it sounds like. Did you get water baptized after that?
I did on my birthday.
Okay.
Yeah, my birthday is August 14th, and it just lined up that's when the church was doing baptisms.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really special as well.
That's awesome. So God not only revealed himself to you, he not only replaced your anger with his perfect peace, he also gave you a revelation that of the depths of your own depravity and what you had been, and then proceeded to give you a dream of how clean he had made you after showing you how dark it really was. Do I have all that right?
Correct. And
it's awesome.
You know, there wasn't like a sudden realization with that, with the revelation of my wife and I, there was, but the coming clean, you know, I hadn't heard that Jesus makes you clean and all of these concepts of clean and unclean. So I was given that before I knew the meaning. And as I learned the meaning, it really pointed out how profound it was to me.
Okay. Yeah, as you said, in the coming weeks, you learned more about that, like Jesus is the living water and stuff like that.
Yeah. And, you know, I hadn't had contact with my wife for 2 or 3 weeks after that. So it was very much just me and God constantly. You know, the church community, when I walked into that church for the first time, it's still my home church. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. You know, I've always felt like an outsider, even with close friends. You know, the first responder community is very tight knit. I still felt like I was outside of that to an extent. This is the first time, you know, with my brothers and sisters that I felt like, hey, this is where I belong.
Yeah. That's awesome. You felt the significance of the family of God.
Absolutely.
The body of Christ. Okay, so you immediately got plugged into a local church, which is awesome. You still go there, right?
I do.
And how did the story of your reconciliation with your wife take place?
Yeah, so, you know, given my previous anger issues and, you know, displays of rage, she rightly so was hesitant in just letting me see my son. And, you know, there was no like court orders of separation or anything, but I didn't want to push anything. So she was gracious enough to give me supervised visits with my son. And there was one occurrence where my son looked at me. It was just the two of us. He was 3 years old. He's very jovial. And in this moment, he had the most serious face. And he says, "Dada, the wind." I was like, "What?" "Yeah, the wind." What? There's no wind. And excuse me. Since that point, I had the Tetragrammaton YHWH or Yahweh stuck in my head.
Yeah.
Didn't know why.
The Lord.
Yeah, I had no idea. I didn't even know how to pronounce it. So I'm just kind of scratching my head at this for days. And then that Wednesday, 2 days later, I go to church. This man that, you know, I didn't know sits down next to me. It's just the two of us at this table for a Wednesday night. And he opens up his Bible. He has a Post-it note with 4 verses, I believe, pertaining to the breath of God. And he said, "Yeah, I was working in the coal mines the other day, and God gave me these verses, and they all have to do with the breath of God, and I don't know why. I can't figure out the connection. I don't know why he would give this to me."
Yeah.
So I recounted what happened to me, you know, me and my son, and told him about the name of God. And he says, "Man, I think these are for you." And I looked up the verses. You know, he gave me the the book name, chapter, and verse. I looked them up, typed them out, and it was just this word of wisdom from God that I don't remember the exact verses off the top of my head, but it was really in Isaiah where God forms flesh onto these skeletons on these dry bones.
Yeah.
He brings the dead to life. He will restore my marriage. He'll create something new out of this thing that was dead. And to do that, I have to walk a path of righteousness and be baptized in the Spirit. And just like he made Adam from dust, he made me a new man. So it was really just, hey, trust in me, and I will make a new thing. And he did. God is faithful.
So sorry to ask this because I think I missed it. How long after you got saved was this? Was this a couple months after?
No, this is about 2 or 3 weeks.
2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so
Were you
just like researching and trying to educate yourself on Christianity as much as possible? Like, how did you know the Tetragrammaton, the name of the Lord, 𝗬𝗪𝗏𝗪, Yahweh? Did you just stumble on it in your research, or?
Yeah, that specifically, I'm not sure. I think that just came to me. Maybe I had seen it subconsciously somewhere, and it just really stuck with me. But as far as everything else, it was, even to this day, I have an insatiable hunger to learn everything I can about God's word. And it's not for personal gain. It's so that I can be better prepared to answer questions for others, lead others to the Lord, reaffirm faith, things of that nature. But from the second, that evening that I was saved, it's been nonstop listening to sermons, podcasts, and I even went to Hillsdale College, listened to all of their Christianity lectures, went to DTS online, listened to all of their online free lectures. It's just nonstop. I want to hear every perspective, every word. Some things I agree with, some things I don't. But just anything from a simple sermon to a college lecture.
Wow.
It's been nonstop since then.
Wow. How about that? And then you somehow wound up at seminary.
Yeah. It's a bit of a long story, but to cut it short, I felt this strong pull for a month or two over the summer of 2024. God had shown me that I'm meant to teach in some capacity in the future. And to do that, I first need to go through seminary. And it's extremely challenging. I have a master's degree in emergency management, and seminary is so much more challenging than that. And I think it's because I don't want to cut any corners at all.
Okay. All right. It's not because those stingy professors.
No. Yeah, you would know. But I read every word I'm instructed to read, every book of the Bible, everything. I just want the most rounded mind that I can possibly have, because the Bible says, do all things as though you're doing it for God. That's right. And this is literally doing it for God. So
that's right. That's right. Amen, brother. And that's I'm not surprised someone like you, God took your strong desire to learn and increase knowledge and your curiosity and turned it into something he's going to use for his glory and for his church. I mean, that's why you're in seminary, and he's also going to use it to deepen your roots. When people, the great thing about your situation is you went into seminary without the baggage. If you grow up in church, people have strong views on seminary going in both directions, one way or the other. Some people joke and call it cemetery, and other people are like, oh yeah, you got to go to seminary if you're going to be in ministry. But you're coming in with a clean canvas, which is pretty awesome. Dan and I know each other because we met at the seminary where he attends. But we got to finish up the story with how you and your wife got restored. We sort of went on a little rabbit hole there, but let's weave it back, because you were telling us you get this revelation of your own cleanness. You have this experience where your son looks at you seriously. I know what you mean when you say like 2 and 3-year-olds don't necessarily look at you with a serious face and say like a solid statement, "Daddy, the wind." I know what you mean by that. And then you start learning about the breath of God and the name of the Lord, which is, in English, we spell it YHWH. If you want to spell it transliterated from Hebrew, that's how you would spell it. In Hebrew, it's 𝗬𝗪𝙗, but you were actually going to say something about that, learning about the name of the Lord and the breath of God. I think you were going somewhere with that.
No, yeah, I'm not sure how that popped into my mind during that time, but I will give you a plug.
Was it the fact that when you did you learn somewhere in there? I'm pretty sure you already had this when I met you in class, that when you say the name Yahweh, it actually sounds like it's meant, some people say, to sound like you're breathing.
Yeah, that's I have heard that before. It's the sound of breathing in and breathing out, and that's kind of where the connection of the breath of God comes in.
Yeah.
On this podcast, there's a great episode on the background of the name of God.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll have to look up which episode that is and put it in the show notes below. I do remember which one you're talking about. I just don't have the episode number. But tell us, how did you and your wife get reconciled after this? And did your wife get saved?
Yeah, so over the coming months after I reconnected with my son, of course, my wife was very hesitant. I'm looking at a new person, but is it real? And of course, everyone else looking in, thinking the same thing. I think that's completely understandable. For the most part, people don't just change in a split second. And it's not, like minor changes. This is a complete personality overhaul. A ton of different beliefs that I held were completely changed in an instant. So it's kind of difficult for her. But ultimately, just by being me, just being the person that God formed, the person that I was meant to be through God, she eased her mind, and we started to reconnect. And there was one night we were staying in separate houses for months, and there was one morning where I felt the need to call her at 5:30 in the morning, which is insane for me. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a morning person. And she was awoken by God as well around the same time. Her heart was very troubled. I was very confused. I didn't know why I needed to talk to her that early in the morning. And I texted her.
You guys are still living apart, right?
We are, yeah.
Just seeing each other to share visits with your son and stuff like that.
Yeah, just a couple times a week for a couple of hours. And I texted her, and she texted back and said she had something that she needed to tell me, and it was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
And so I called her, and she's crying, and she said, "God's telling me I need to tell you this." And at this point, she is not saved. She is just very much involved with God. She's getting to know him. She's being very cautious, I guess. I don't know how to quite describe it, but she's very close. And
she knows you're a Christian. I mean, you're testifying at this point.
Absolutely.
And also showing her through your actions that you're a changed man, but she knows about your conversion.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for sure. For, a month or two before this point, she's crying. She's very distraught. And she says, that she was pregnant prior to her leaving, and that she had aborted that child. And, I was heartbroken. And she said, it's something you could never forgive. And I stopped for maybe 30 seconds, and I said, I forgive you. And she said, how can you forgive something like that? And I said, if God can forgive me for everything that I've done, if he can show me love through everything, I didn't deserve it at all.
Yeah.
I didn't deserve any of that. But if he can do that with me, then I can do that with you. I was very much unclean, and I didn't deserve God's grace. None of us do. I very much did not. And if he can show grace to me, then I can forgive you. And she just didn't understand why, how I could. And she prayed for clarity for me so that I would understand why she had to do that. And that evening in church, it was a Wednesday night. They split the men and the women to worship separately. And as I'm worshiping God, I'm just filled with this clarity. It was like a 3-hour conversation, filling my soul in a split second. And just all of this understanding of not to blame her. It was done without my consent, but it wasn't. I fully consented through my actions. It was very much a mutual choice, whether I verbally said anything or not, and we are both to blame. But that's not who we are anymore. Yeah. And that's the short version of it. But we had like an hour-long talk about it, and she just burst out into tears, and she said, I prayed all day for clarity, and he gave it to you. And she got down on the floor, and she bowed down to God, and just tears streaming down her face, thanking him. And she gave her life to God right there. This is so, so beautiful.
And you were there to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So through the forgiveness that God showed you, I mean, he literally showed it to you.
Yeah.
With the dream you had, you were able to pass that on to your wife, and she was led to the Lord through that.
Yeah.
He used it to draw her. And I imagine at this point, she also knew that there was something different about you, that it wasn't just talk. Because this had been what, at least a couple of months, maybe?
Yeah, it was 2 to 4 months, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Man, that's amazing, brother. Praise God.
Absolutely.
So now you and your wife are together, and you're raising your son, and your family is whole. Yeah,
we are. We have this great community of friends through the church. It's just truly incredible. It's incredible to see our son come out of Sunday school and tell us these various biblical stories, and to watch him pray over his food unprompted at 4 years old. Yeah. And just give thanks to God. And it's amazing. We still have issues. We still have disagreements, just like any couple. But we are far closer with God than we ever were without God. Yeah. And we actually renewed our vows last year as well, because when we were married, we insisted that it was not in a church and that God was not mentioned. So, we kind of thought, well, were we even married in the eyes of God? So we were remarried. Wow. You renewed your vows. That's awesome. And you put God at the center of everything. We did. Wow. That's fantastic, brother. So it sounds like, well, it doesn't sound like, it's true that God was, this is something that I've been on my mind throughout that I have to ask as we're sort of wrapping this up. God was pursuing you. Yeah. He was chasing after you. And you and your wife, it sounds like, we're both resisting, but you more than her. Oh, yeah. Did anyone ever talk to you about God or the gospel in all those years that you were running away from him? Yeah, that's a great question. And not really. Everyone knew my thought. So no one approached me. No one tried to have a conversation. Some of my own family members are very devoted to Christ, and they chose not to say anything because they knew how I would react. So it was kind of, what's the point?
Yeah.
And I understand that mindset. And I really, really encourage anyone to spread the word. Even if it's going to be a failing battle, you really need to push, because you never know when the same words are finally going to sink in.
Yeah.
I could have heard it 100 times and still laughed at it, but you don't know. Only God knows.
On the 101st time,
Yeah,
it might have got you. It got you the night it did. Yeah, that when I first heard your story, that was convicting to me, because I have my own family members that I love, but that I don't talk to enough, because I think it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, they've heard this before.
yeah,
They're against it, or they don't want it. It's easier to just, avoid it, so there's no friction or confrontation. Man, I don't think that's God's heart at all. I think that our witness should be so overflowing that we can't help but speak. But I also really appreciate the fact that your family got restored, not just through your words, but through your actions. Your wife could see that you were a new man. And that's one of the major things that convinced her and showed her that this was real, and apparently that God was real, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And real quick, I really love the testimony of our friend Dr. Meyer.
Yeah.
He says that he sat in church for years and years, front row, read the Bible multiple times, and when the pastor finally said, Jesus wants a personal relationship with you, or when he first heard that is when it clicked.
Yeah.
So I think the way you approach it as well really matters. Jesus does want a personal relationship with you. It's not just some follow the laws and you're a Christian.
Right.
It's not this cultural Christianity where you wear a cross and you're saved.
Right.
You truly need to have that personal relationship with Christ as you were meant to. And I highly encourage it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't, you should probably head back and reevaluate and see, because that is truly what we're talking about here, right? When you become his follower, he marks you.
Yeah.
You're owned by him. You belong to him. And you can't help but have a personal relationship with him, because how do you follow someone you don't know and you're not in active relationship with? So yeah, I agree with you. Even today, non-Catholic Protestant Christians, it's so easy for us to fall into this mode of doing things to check boxes, thinking that our actions make us Christian. And we know that faith without works is dead. And we know that real, genuine faith is always followed up by action. But especially where I live in the South, I mean, the thing that struck me the most when I moved here 8 years ago was how many people go to church. It's like the majority of people go to church. It wasn't like that where I grew up in California.
Yeah.
But here everybody goes. But does that mean that you're a Christian? Are you living in ongoing, continual fellowship with the Lord? And are you following him? Is he your Lord? Is he your master? It's so easy for us to look at this, the Sadducees and the Pharisees and think, oh, they were just knuckleheads. They didn't get it. It's like they almost become like the butt of all the jokes.
Yeah.
But they were devout. Many of them were very devout, religiously observant people.
Yeah.
It's just they missed the mark. They missed the fact that when the Son of God was standing right in front of them, they couldn't recognize him because they were too caught up in doing all of the things that made them faithful Jews, as opposed to living in chesed, covenant faithfulness with God. God says in Hosea, in the Hebrew, I desire chesed, I desire covenant faithfulness, not your sacrifices. It was never your lambs and your goats that you brought and slaughtered on an altar that made me love you. I've always wanted one thing from you: faithfulness.
Yeah.
What is that embodied by? Well, relationship, our hearts being yielded. A couple of things that come to mind. Anyway. Yeah. So your word to the church after sharing your testimony would be, don't be silent. Is that it?
Yeah. Evangelize. And, you don't have to go to seminary to evangelize. That's my path. But, you can, any intelligence level, if you're a poor orator, if you can't speak very well, it doesn't matter. The core concept of the gospel is really all you need to convey to change someone's heart.
Yeah.
And then everything else comes after.
Yeah, that's right. Don't ever think that just because someone you think doesn't want to hear it, that you should not share it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right on, brother. Well, Dan, I so appreciate you coming on here and sharing your testimony with our viewers and listeners. I really do. It's been a blessing to have you. Any last thing you want to say? I mean, I know I just asked you if there was a last word, but.
No, I'm really just honored to be here. I hope that this encourages Christians to evangelize more. And I hope that, if there are any non-believers listening, that they at least delve into the Bible, read the book of John or Mark and at least see what it's about, open your mind a little bit. You might be convinced that there's no God or that there's some God that's out there somewhere, but, just read it. Just read it and see for yourself.
Yeah. Amen, brother. That's great advice. I love it. You've been listening to the That You May Know Him podcast, illuminating biblical truth and applying it to faith, life, and culture so that you can know and love Jesus Christ like never before. If you want to learn more about who we are or what we do, you can go to our website, thatyoumayknowhim.com. And if you got anything out of this interview and this testimony that Dan shared, please don't forget to leave us a comment on YouTube and to like and subscribe to our channel or to our podcast feed, wherever you may be viewing or listening. Dan, thanks again, brother. And thank you all for watching and listening to That You May Know Him. Until next time, stay blessed and live loved.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. Also, please consider giving us a 5-star review and telling your friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and check out our website for tons of free, biblically based content like Bible studies, devotionals, articles, and Bible teachings. The That You May Know Him podcast is produced by That You May Know Him Ministries, Durham, North Carolina. You can visit our website at thatyoumayknowhim.com.